Okay, welcome everybody to September the 9th Q&A. So we are going to jump in with a screen share of my X feed and we'll talk through some recent tweets. So I've just cleared 9,000 followers on X. So if you don't have X, maybe you don't want to download it because you don't necessarily need another opportunity or reason to go on technology. But for some of you, if you're interested, then it can be an interesting platform. So what I've posted here is just my latest podcast with Dr. Brian Grimm. So Brian is a um, I mean, he was originally a family medicine trainee, but he works in more critical care medicine at the moment. It's an interesting podcast. I'll also post it in the school group with a link for you guys. But Brian is an incredibly smart guy, who is doing really applying light water magnetism principles to medicine and disease, and coming up with some very cool and unique perspectives. So I kind of I feel like certain ways I just discovered and kind of I'm trying to give him a signal boost him because I think he's got some great perspectives and a lot of value to give. So yeah, listen to that podcast if you haven't yet. It's just dropped and let me know what you think. So, I won't read through this whole post, but it's just very, very good. Is very, very unique takes. So yeah, really good stuff. What else have we got here? Rusty's great. He's a Indian guy who 21,000 followers. He's pretty big account. He's an Indian guy who's all over the light story and particularly the EMF story. He's done a lot of great work talking about EMFs and non-native EMF and electromagnetic fields, and just posts about the harms of sleeping behind your solar inverter and all this kind of stuff. So he's a good follow on Twitter or on X or Instagram. But
My
his
dad.
this post is a good one. I retweeted it and I like it because I previously had read similar papers, and this idea that human breast milk is essentially a means by which the body is entraining the circadian rhythm of the infant. And what that means is the mum sends out uh, circadian signal in the form of cortisol and melatonin through the breast milk, and that helps the it helps the baby to essentially entrain and know what time of day it is or night. So interesting implications for things like express breast milk. Are you feeding the baby the right milk that was at the right time? Implications for mom who's scrolling. I mean, we talk about preeclampsia. I mean, preeclampsia is one of these conditions that has such a strong association with vitamin D deficiency and and gestational diabetes. Like they're at the stage now of essentially reclassifying gestational diabetes because so many women are kind of making the diagnosis, and it's like, okay, why are all these women suddenly insulin resistant and pregnant in pregnancy? And it's like, well, okay, what's changed? And again, I don't think it's the food hasn't changed that much in the past 5 years, but what has changed is everyone is on screens late at night. So, my personal opinion is that the reason why more women are what met the criteria for gestational diabetes is because everyone's eating late at night. Everyone is on technology and the inside, and that's having massive implications for metabolic health. Okay, this is a kind of interesting tweet. Again, Helios, and we before we press record, we were just discussing about sleep apnea and how prevalent it is now, and how it's obstructive sleep apnea, or at least central apnea is probably a protective mechanism against excessive oxygen, where oxygen being an oxidative stressor, essentially if the body's lacking antioxidant capability, I think probably mostly because of melatonin deficiency from not enough infrared light during the day and too much blue light at night, then the unopposed oxidative stress and probably the body's like, all right, well, let's reduce that and potentially at nighttime. So the reason I talk about sleep apnea is because Helios, I think he's in his 30s, but he had quite severe sleep apnea and atrial fibrillation even that he talks about. And the cause for him was his EMF environment, and he remains exquisitely sensitive to EMFs. Whether this is a form of electromagnetic hypersensitivity syndrome. He's talks about a lot on his profile. Could be an interesting person to talk to in the future. But he's a smart guy. I don't know what his training is, but not medical training, but very unique takes on health. And that's why I love Twitter or X is you find a bunch of accounts who and you can actually just essentially appraise their ideas by their merit because you don't I mean if you're using it properly, in my opinion, you forget about whatever qualification people have. You actually just interrogate the idea that they're presenting, and some people I think present some really good ideas despite not having a formal qualification. But what he's saying in this tweet is that a girl is born carrying the oocytes, so the germ cells, um, her germ cells for her own children, but also for the children of her children. A single oocyte carries 600,000 mitochondria, all are sensitive to electromagnetic fields. So when you EMF fry the mother, you just EMF fry the next two generations as well. So what I did is I retweeted this, but what I said is what he's describing is the concept of intergenerational or transgenerational epigenetic effects. Transgenerational implies subsequent, i.e. third and fourth generations affected, even in the absence of a second generational exposure. So let me break this down. Let me just break this down for you, and maybe that will I'm going to stop sharing. Essentially, what this means is that what we know is that the organism essentially marks DNA, and it marks DNA with things like histone modifications, DNA methylation, and it's essentially like a annotation to the DNA code, and it essentially affects the way genes are expressed. So this is epigenetics, and what epigenetics is the way for the organism to encode information about its environment to the next generation without essentially changing the underlying DNA strand. So there's no DNA change that only happens, over longer periods, over generational periods through selection, the dying out of organisms that don't pass on that genetic material, but it's more immediate. And that's why it's called epigenetic. Epi is a Greek prefix meaning upon. So it's on top of the gene code itself. And these epigenetic effects, which are massively affected by mitochondrial function and mitochondrial dysfunction, understandably, because it's conveying information to that subsequent generation to help it survive. And these epigenetic effects can result from all kinds of environmental exposure. So there's been studies done on people who were exposed to Dutch famine, and how that affects the offspring's likelihood of getting diabetes and obesity. Again, all modifying probably things like their personal fat threshold, their ability of their fat cells to take in energy, all this kind of stuff. And then there's all this data on rats and mice where they can, because of it's a shorter generation and from ethical reasons, is that you can expose the rat to a toxin, and then you measure, you look at the offspring, and you look at the offspring one generation, but also 2 and 3 and 4 generations into the future. And what these transgenerational effects are showing is that, come back and focus, is that certain things can essentially skip over. So the rat gets exposed, the daughter doesn't get exposed, but the grandson and the great grandson gets exposed. And they can obviously do a controlled experiment where then there's a control that doesn't get that exposure, and then they can measure bad health outcomes in the essentially third and fourth generations, even if their second generation wasn't exposed. And these hold for things like endocrine disruptors. That's a really powerful example of epigenetic effects, and it actually happened in humans with this medication called diethylstilbestrol, which was used, I believe, for morning sickness, and it caused both intergenerational but also transgenerational epigenetic effect, such that the women and their offspring were at higher risk of uterine malformation, vaginal clear cell adenocarcinoma, uh, like penile malformations, which is like cryptorchism, which is undescended testes, hypospadis, where the penis doesn't essentially seal up embryologically. So all these bad stuff happens, and it's a consequence of these epigenetic effects through from exposure to the mother or the woman. So again, this is like actually this is an interesting analogy. I talked to Jake Walkie about this years ago, maybe 3 years ago, and he had a cool analogy, which is like imagine if you had a tattoo, and when you have a baby, the baby comes out with a tattoo, but it's not only maybe you had a one on your shoulder, but the baby comes out with like a sleeve tattoo, and or the grandson comes out with a whole body tattoo, and that's this idea potentially of like what is the epigenetic environment or signals that we're programming the next generation with, and that's why it's just so important to be careful about what environmental exposures the woman has had. And you can just imagine these days, this day and age, talking EMS, we're talking about circadian rhythm disruption, talking about vitamin D and sunlight deficiency, we're talking about um, chemical endocrine disruptors, talking about nutrient deficiencies and protein micronutrient deficiencies, talking about excess of seed oils and lack of DHA and animal fats. You can herbicides, glyphosate, atrazine, you name it, um, and then it starts to make sense why this the autism rates are what they are, and this everyone's so dysregulated. I think I marvel that is for people, they don't see those effects until they have the child, and they're having the third child and the third autistic child, um, and modern medicine has no answer to them about like why that occurred. And obviously, we can't pin it down to potentially one thing. It's a constellation of mitochondrial uh, stresses or insults. But the point is that there's a biological toll being paid for disrespecting the environment, the kind of metabolic envelope, the ancestral environmental conditions, and that includes light, water, food, etc. That we evolve with. There's a cost to pay, unfortunately. So I'm doing my best to help educate about that, but we've got a long road ahead of us. So very interesting stuff. Let's jump into the questions. So the first question was from Jane. Hi Max, I'm really struggling with the fat element of carnivore. I would say I'm 95% meat-based, mainly beef and lamb. I mostly use ground beef or lamb and make patties for 2 meals a day. The lamb is very fatty, the beef less so, and all is sourced from a local organic farmer. Problem is I fry the patties gently and there is a lot of fat melting out into the pan. Is it okay to pour this fat over the meat once cooked? I make my own beef tallow by gently rendering it down. So again, it's heated but not as fried as such. All steak here in the UK, especially ribeyes, is extremely expensive and just not affordable for me. Eggs and dairy are out as I'm so sensitive to these products. I always feel hungry, so more fat, I think, but how do I do this in a healthy way? It's a good question, Jane. And I guess the implementation of strict carnivore is can be challenging, and I haven't needed to be strict carnivore for a very long time, and I guess the goal of working on these other foundations of health, especially with sunlight and circadian rhythms, is to ideally like build up some more tolerance so we're not as reliant on strict carnivore. But obviously it's a journey. It's something that we're aiming towards. I think I think the essentially the gallbladder needs to upregulate its ability to make bile and to essentially emulsify all the dietary fat. It historically and ancestrally has been able to do that, and obviously individual variation aside, it is an inducible talent or function. I guess the kind of troubleshooting that might help. I mean, sometimes people can find that if they're, and this might not necessarily be for you, but for some people who are really trying to increase fat intake for, say, maintaining a therapeutic ketosis level, and speak to when you listen to people like Amber O'Hearn, who's one of the very old carnivore diet proponents, and Siobhan Huggins, they even would use cubes of fat, of essentially fat, either minimally cooked or even raw, and maybe found that digested a little bit better. Sounds extreme, so see, maybe that's something you can try. Maybe that's not going to suit you. Otherwise, yeah, I think probably just mixing, getting the fattier blends of mince. When I've got obviously lived in different places at different times, but one butcher that I used to go to was very amenable to the mixing of like the fat ratios, and uh, essentially like a really good burger mince is chuck and brisket, like 50-50 chuck and minced brisket. But you can use things like that, especially if your butcher is open to really getting a fattier mince, and then yeah, potentially keeping it less cooked. So rather than well done, which will melt all the fat and it will all go away. Potentially keeping it a bit less cooked, and that might make it a bit easier to stomach because the it's a rarer cut, so it's a rarer patty, and potentially you can stomach it a bit better. But yeah, give that a go. That would kind of be my advice to try. Yeah, obviously keep up your electrolyte levels, because you want you want plenty of a strong stomach acid to also optimize the digestion. So you'll get that from plenty of salt as needed. Although some advocates, pro-carnivore advocates, advocate against needing salt. Perhaps maybe that occurs only after long-term adaptation. So maybe just go with what you feel like. Cool. Samantha's asked, I think it would be interesting to
Mac,
talk about.
can I just back to your other question? It's Cheryl
Sure.
here.
Yeah.
Just did Jane also ask in that question? I thought I heard it, but may be wrong. I thought she also asking about whether she could eat the fat that was it cooked in. I thought she was asking, does she discard the fat that comes out of the patty, or can she pour it over the patty? I might have misunderstood, but I thought she also asked that question.
No,
Uh,
I heard that
Oh,
too.
you did
yeah,
too.
yeah,
Okay. I
yeah.
just
So
thought,
I
I
don't.
mean, I imagine Jane's not here, but yeah, I thought she was
Yeah,
asking, can she eat the fat
Yeah.
that
yeah.
it's been
No,
cooked in?
thanks for picking that up. I don't necessarily think that's a problem. Um, high temperature cooking. mm, I mean, yeah, I don't necessarily think it's a deal. To see how, again, an individual response. If you kind of you eating a lot of that and it's really making you feel horrible or causing diarrhea, then maybe avoid it. But yeah, listen. I would say, Jane, listen to your body with that one. Do you get satiety out of it? Do you feel good, or you just feel bloated? And yeah, so shouldn't, I mean, doesn't necessarily have to be a problem. I previously myself, um yeah, you kind of mix it over and then you pour it over, say, burger patties after you've cooked them. Yeah, but yeah, listen to your body when it comes to that. Cool. So next, we'll go on to the next one. Samantha said I think it would be interesting to talk about cold acclimatization. As your part of the world, Southern Hemisphere, starts to enter warmer months, mine enters colder weather. There are a lot of posts about embracing cold, particularly if descended from colder regions. It's not always as simple as some people find cold really uncomfortable. I can feel cold as actual pain, and I'm very slow to cold adapt, whereas I heat adapt super quickly. That said, summer and autumn 2024, I deliberately cold but bathed, swam in the North Sea, and at the time was to see if I improved my immune function. It didn't, but I did have the most comfortable winter I've had. I didn't love being cold, but I could manage and was able to go for short walks in a t-shirt and shorts and didn't need the heating on full blast. I think for me, the key was a gradual exposure of short periods of cold baths and sea and building it up. Same with sun exposure. Probably everyone can learn to tolerate cold, but I guess coming to autumn is the time of year at the latest to start deliberately acclimatizing in order to manage cold days and nights. What do you think? Okay. Great topic of conversation,
I'll
Samantha.
plug my phone in.
I think that what a couple of thoughts about this. I definitely agree that gradual and consistency is the key, and it's exactly the same as building the solar panels. So
Well, I'm going to have to put Max on then if I'm going to charge my phone.
if you have in inside environment and then you go straight outside and into into the freezing 3-degree bath, you are not in any way or shape or form um going to be feeling good about that. Yeah, you're not at all. And so what I think is much better is, as the season's changing, try and continue to some degree your summertime routine. And what this might be is, when obviously I wasn't living in the same latitude as you are, Samantha, but when I lived maybe at 26th latitude, it was still quite cold during the winter, but I just continue my beach swim even when the temperature changed. And the great thing about that as an adaptation strategy is it's extremely gradual, because your body is essentially just recognizing, as each day changes, there's actual variation that kind of gets dissolved out with the noise of day to day. So it's extremely smooth adaptation phase, and you'll find that it's the most effortless, because suddenly, or you might look after a month, but the change has been so gradual because you've been out there regularly. So I guess that would be some advice in terms of a acclimatization strategy, is to keep in place your as much as you can of your summertime routine, but obviously going to have to make some changes. People in the US, if you've got massive snowfall, and you are going to have to put some more clothes on. Obviously, I'm not saying don't do that, but uh, allowing yourself the discomfort of being a little bit colder and getting your feet a little bit a little bit colder, a little bit on the ground, etc., is going to help. The interesting point about feeling cold as pain, the actual neural pathways that convey the nerve sensation, it's the same. So they're extremely old, ancient pathway in what I can't remember. I think it could be the lateral part of the spinal cord. There's certain nerve tracts, and one of them is for pain, temperature, and itch, and the other one is for proprioception. And again, the pain, temperature, and itch one is the older one. So it's not surprising to me that you're feeling that kind of overlap, because and neuroanatomically that kind of checks out. So, what else can I say about cold acclimatization? I really like. So we got two options really, air and water. I like cold water bathing, especially if we can do it in a natural body because of this, the added benefits you get being in nature, being grounded. It's the most natural way of kind of getting these circadian habits in line. So if you have a swimming habit that you can maintain, great, all the better. And then air, and as you alluded to, Samantha, you can simply just wear less clothes and really walk around, and that's another kind of great acclimatization strategy. So that's daytime, and then nighttime. What are the options? Really, allowing the room to kind of get colder while keeping, you can still keep your bed and the blankets on to kind of help you maintain a warm internal environment, but having your head exposed and allowing the room temperature to cool down, so your body is still exposed to that temperature of air on your face, and breathing that in. That is also a useful way of telling your body that it's winter, because that's what we want to do. We want to remind our body or convey to our body about accurate time of year. Just like we like to tell it the accurate time of day with our light habits, we want to tell it accurate time of year with our temperature habits and our temperature exposures. Look, and it doesn't mean that you have to be freezing for 4 or 5 months. I don't think that's necessary. I think, and it's not enjoyable either. I think you can still heat up. You can, and even you should, if you're doing things like sauna, especially in really high latitudes, in really low light environment. It's like supplemental, but simply just touching that colder temperature, allowing the body to sit there for a while before warming up, can be really beneficial. So yeah, that would be my take on temperature as a cold and winter acclimatization as it relates to temperature. As it relates to light, I mean, there's a lot said, as you mentioned. Some good posts. Carrie Bennett, Sarah Kleiner, Danielle Hamilton. They've all kind of had some pretty good winter style Instagram posts. If you're on Instagram, check out those accounts. But which I agree with. I agree with a lot of what those ladies say. Um, and this idea that perhaps for those who have a fair skin type, then maybe during the winter months when you're more covered up, and less exposed to the sun, then it's potentially, or it is appropriate for the body to potentially run off stored vitamin D in the fat cells, and to uh, coast a little bit on those stores to potentially have more melatonin being made because you're in more darkness, because there's less light. So potentially respecting that, maybe mini hibernation, or not trying to fight against the ambient daylight conditions with artificial light in a dark winter. And yeah, and kind of run with that, and allow the body to essentially dissipate its tan. Well, ancestrally that's what would have happened, and that would have helped to harvest less and less available UV light during the winter. But in today's day and age, or if you're kind of dark in London, then you have less options. You really just want to keep your light exposure up. You might even want to travel, because it's a different kettle of fish with that amount of melanin. So yeah, hope that helps. I think there's huge benefits. Maybe we didn't talk a lot about it, but there's huge benefits about being cold adapted for metabolic health with this brown fat, for potentially with the thyroid health. The thyroid gland is like the chief endocrine gland that helps interface our metabolism with the environment. So it's supremely sensitive to environmental signals. It's sensitive. It's setting our metabolic rate and it's taking temperature inputs as part of that. So yeah, as Thomas Seeger has kind of posted a fair bit about, who is the owner of the Morosco Forge Ice Bar Company. He has talked a lot about thyroid health and cold exposure with, and the evidence for that benefit and this essential interplay between the thyroid gland and the brown fat that can really benefit thyroid health. And so, yeah, I'm a big proponent of sensible cold exposure. And if, again, I think we've talked about this a lot. If you're feeling good and you're not otherwise ill, you're not fighting off a virus, then that's more of the time where your body can potentially deal with colder shock stimulus with longer duration exposures or potential colder or ice baths, if it's going to be appropriate for you, not necessarily for everyone. Cool. Udesh, I eat raw oysters periodically. Do you think there's a big risk eating them raw? Also, what are your thoughts on heavy metals in oysters? I heard William Davis mention he doesn't like oysters because of the cadmium accumulation. Okay, so yes, I eat raw oysters periodically as well. And I haven't, touch wood, had a foodborne illness from raw oysters. I guess I'm pretty particular about where I source from, and to the extent of asking the people at the shop like when were these opened, because in Australia you buy them having been opened. Obviously, but I mean, you can buy them unshucked, but then you have to you have to go home and essentially use a sharp double-bladed knife and a medieval chain gauntlet, and open them yourself. And unless you're skilled, you'll end up with bits of shell in your oyster, unless you've done it a fair bit and you know what you're doing. And if you don't have your chain mail gauntlet, then you can really do a bad penetrating hand injury. So you got to be careful, but most people, most of the time, are going to be buying open oysters. So best is to, before you buy them. So this is what I recommend: go to the shop, have your local guy, your fishmonger, and you should have this guy like on your team. You need to, because if you do, he'll help you out. He'll be able to tell you exactly what's coming in, when it's coming in, when it was caught, who caught it. You want this information because it's relevant. So if you can, have your local fishmonger, talk to them, and he'll tell you, okay, these came in from Coffin Bay, these came in from Port Augusta, whatever, yesterday, and they were opened this morning. There you go. Sign me up, and then you have much less worries about potential foodborne illness because they're fresh. And that would absolutely be my recommendation for pregnant women who have decided that the risk and benefit of seafood consumption is favorable, and they like to eat raw seafood. And again, you just got to be really careful about sourcing. As for the heavy metals, I think to some degree that this also holds, because if you're getting, if the oysters are grown in an environment that's close to a industrial discharge, then they're potentially going to have more contaminants in them than if they're grown in a pristine environment. Do shellfish concentrate heavy metals? Yeah, I think they do. I think that's without a doubt they do. The question is, on balance, what is the benefit? There's and a quick side note, the evolution of darkly pigmented hair is believed in part, we dump a whole heap of melanin into the hair follicle, into the hair, and potentially as a means of heavy metal excretion. So this is probably an adaptation that lots of the world had to dealing with heavy metals. I referenced that study in the Solar Callus course under can't remember which lesson it is now, but this evidence, which is pretty strong, which is the melanin is chelating the heavy metal, and then we're either dumping it either through keratinocytes or through hair shedding and hair growth. And people read hair tissue mineral analysis and attempt to infer health state from that, but which is, I think, that's a complex process and can be fraught. But the point is that the heavy metals are being dumped into that hair follicle, and I think that if we are tanning, if we're building our solar callus, then we're really aiding in the natural excretion of chelation and excretion of those heavy metals. So, do I have some hard data about the exact amounts? No, I don't. But what I'm saying is that it's probably going to vary. It's going to vary with one, how much seafood you're eating and what is the provenance of that seafood and how much potential heavy metals are in that. But two, it's going to depend on things like your solar exposure, your skin type, even potentially, in terms of balancing out that equation. My hunch, my thought is that most people would probably be better off by eating the seafood from a good source and really working on getting that healthy solar callus, and it's going to be a virtuous interplay, because the more DHA and marine foods you eat, the more the less photosensitive you become, and the more ability to build a good tanning response and make melanin. Copper is essential for a cofactor for tyrosinase. So it's I think it's a really virtuous cycle. And think about how we would have been scavenging or eating seafoods for the expansion of humans across the world. And it would be us wearing pretty minimal clothing in rock pools, on lake shores, on river shores, in the ocean, having our hair and our bodies exposed. So at the same time as consuming these foods that had varying degrees of heavy metal, we also were building a healthy tan and therefore chelating and excreting. The other point is that certain beneficial metals like selenium can help interfere with or competitively absorb to prevent the absorption of some heavy metals. So there's data showing that selenium in seafood can be protective against lead or mercury, things like mercury. So again, I would again go with deferring to the consumption of seafoods rather than against. Bonnie, when I go outside for the sunrise, because of my work schedule, I go out between 6 and 6:30. Sunrise is currently 6:30 according to my weather app where I live. Am I getting benefits during the time between daybreak and sunrise? There is a bright floodlight outside my backyard for safety that's on the whole time I'm there. Does this have a negative impact because it's before the official sunrise? I think it would be better between 6:30 and 7, but that doesn't fit with my work. What are your thoughts? Okay. Yes. The interesting questions about the practicalities of sun viewing. I agree that 6:37 would be better, and I guess the reason is because you are getting that some direct irradiance from the sun, versus just the scattered light from the sky, which is still going to be beneficial, particularly because a lot of the light that's going to be scattered is in the healthy solar blue wavelengths. As in, the wavelengths are the same, but it's solar, and you're also getting longer wavelength as well. So I think it's still going to be good to be out there, because you're giving the body some solar blue light to kick off the circadian day. What about the floodlight? Well, I guess it depends. Maybe if you're out really early and the only thing is the floodlight, then that's not ideal. But if there's been enough, I don't know what the daybreak is in exactly at your point in time, but if if you kind of, maybe you can use your blue blockers as a quick guide. If you take use your blue blockers and have a look outside, if the spectrum or if the image changes really significantly, then there's a lot of blue light out there. Then probably this floodlight could be just drowned out by or drowned out or diluted by what's coming from the sky. So I kind of like I use that as a guide. Like if the sun is still really faint and the artificial light, say from a street lamp, people have asked this before, is relatively stronger, then I say just again you want to be looking at solar blue light first, not the artificial blue light first. So I would avoid that. But if it's got to the stage where there's enough of daybreak, enough of dawn to drown out that that artificial floodlight, so to speak, then I would just get out there and not really worry about it. But yeah, that on the whole, and again, as long as you're not looking at a brightly lit sports ground with all these huge floodlights, it's almost always going to be more beneficial to be outside than to stay inside or stick your head in a blue 10,000 lux box. It's almost always going to be better to be outside. If you want, you can post some pictures on the thread and we can have a look. Cool. Does anyone listening have any questions or comments?
Max, that study that's just come out showing that weight gain, that carbs are not an issue, and it's just the polyunsaturated oils. Have you seen that? It's just come out. It's been around on LinkedIn and
Oh yeah.
Twitter, and saying basically it's not the sugar, it's not the carbs. This is for diabetes and weight
Really?
gain. It's only the seed oils, but I think there's a lot of nuance, and I think there's a lot of other confounding factors. So I answered saying, well, what about the light environment? That can make a huge difference too.
What's the what was the title with the author? I'll look it up.
Look, I can't remember. I might text it to you, message you with it, but it's just there's been a bit of discussion about it on Twitter and on LinkedIn. I've seen. And saying, well, there we are. We told you, a bit like the repeat people. Sugar's fine, carbs are fine. It's just the seed oils that are the problem. But I think it's much more complex than that.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I'm what to say about that? I think what we see in the clinic is that restricting carbohydrates has a very beneficial effect. So then the argument, the question is, what caused the original problem, and is it possible that restricting carbs still is beneficial even if the initial insulin resistance wasn't caused by that? And yeah, absolutely, because it's potentially exacerbating the problem. But the core of the problem of insulin resistance and type 2 diabetes is that these mitochondria aren't burning fuel efficiently. Like
Well,
that is
they didn't make any comment about the metabolic state. Really, it's mainly about weight gain, weight loss.
Okay. I mean, again, you can see weight gain and as the body's response to a suboptimal environment or an appropriate response to what it thinks to be winter. So yeah, I mean the signals that the dietary signals that it's winter are potentially linoleic acid rich oils. But in practice, and this is the thing that I come back to, is that when I'm talking to someone about weight gain or reversing their diabetes, I don't say to them, just get rid of the seed oils and don't do anything else. Obviously, you give them a couple of high value advice, and it's going to be a combination of that. I mean, yes, absolutely get rid of the seed oils. more and more I'm thinking about nocturnal eating, and I think that eating after the sun sets is just a shortcut to visceral fat and weight gain. And I think that drinking alcohol after after the sunset is potentially, why does Sean O'Mara talk about alcohol so much in visceral fat? And um, yes, alcohol has a heap of energy in it. Yes, it contributes to weight gain in and of itself. But I think the context which so many people in the world are drinking alcohol is that they're drinking it at a circadian inappropriate time. And in my recent podcast with Brian Grimm, he said there's a bit where he says, I've cleared fatty liver in people that eat omnivore, carnivore, and plant-based by simply correcting their eating time and making sure that they're eating during the day. So, which is fascinating, and obviously, I tell patients as well, eat during the day. But my thought about why people kind of gain weight, this whole beer belly, is they come home at 7 p.m. and they're still drinking their eighth beer. Yes, it's the beer content, but it's also the time of consumption.
Well, I put up a comment similar to what you just said, so I haven't gone back and had a look at any replies yet, so it'll be interesting.
Put out, chuck a couple of bait fish in the water and see what jumps up and grabs it. Yeah, yeah, yeah. We do it at our retreats. Kind of we have a big meal at 1:30. Last retreat was 1:30, and very few people. I mean, some people are still kind of grazing at 6-7 p.m. But I think that it's mostly kind of the habitation and socialization of evening food consumption rather than true hunger, especially if they've eaten enough, the meat and the fat during the meal. But what I found in myself personally is if I, come home after work and for some reason didn't get any food, and we're eating again 6 p.m. or something, I become extremely more sensitive and I feel more uncomfortable about eating at that time, because normally I'd come home for lunch, essentially lunch in my lunch break, and that's that big dinner, and I don't eat again. So it's interesting to notice how the body feels, and you do become more sensitive for time of day of meal consumption. But yeah, I think it's a really underestimated player, which is chrononutrition or time of food consumption. Obviously, we want to try and do that during the day.
Oh, look, I agree. I mean, whenever we have people to dinner, we invite them at 5 o'clock. And at first, most of our friends now actually think, oh yeah, well, that's a good idea. Eat early and go home early and go to bed early. That works, but they don't understand the the whole logic behind it. But I hate going out to dinner. When they say come at 7 o'clock and you're going to be eating late.
Yeah.
So it's a social problem.
Yeah. Interestingly, Cruz had a tweet something about the rate of androgenic alopecia in Europe, and Spain is the highest, I think, of guys going bald, and he 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 correlated it to the fact that they're also I think the latest food like latest time of dinner. I think in Spain, you'll find
Well, you always wonder how they get on in Spain when, we're there at 11 o'clock at night and everybody's out in the street with their children.
Yeah.
And they don't start eating till 10 or 11. It's extraordinary. I mean, that really flies in the face of they overall they seem to be reasonably healthy.
Yeah, it was an interesting comment. And if I've actually was drilling a bit down into this, because I was thinking about, okay, is there potential for a late meal to delay the onset of melatonin production? And it doesn't, because the melatonin secretion loop is really a light. It's a photic signal. So the late meal doesn't seem to delay the melatonin release, but the act of consuming food or having food in the and asking your intestines to digest that food
Yeah,
while the melatonin is being secreted when the body's trying to potentially go to sleep is problematic. And obviously, you're really trying to wash the do work while the cleaners are in the office, kind of thing. It's like
exactly. No,
you're trying to run the photocopier while the cleaner is vacuuming, the
it's
floor.
crazy.
And that's why people have become more insulin resistant, more glucose intolerant,
But
and yeah,
plus
I mean,
they get heartburn as well.
yeah, heartburn. I mean, Roger Schwelt posted this study that's showing simply just avoiding eating on night shift can attenuate or reduce a whole bunch of the risk associated with getting metabolically sick, and something that I found out myself on night shift, which is just don't eat. You can do yourself a lot of favors. So yeah, meal timing, daytime eating, it's a big one.
Can I ask a question, Max? Have you heard of an increase in like lipedema happening?
I haven't, but I guess I don't have a massive female pet population like clinically.
Yeah.
So I haven't seen, like, I haven't had patients come to me with specifically with that problem, but yeah, have you seen that yourself or?
Yeah, I'm seeing it in my practice.
Mm,
An increase in lipedema and lymphedema, and a mixture of lipedema and lymphedema in people
mm,
that are both thin and overweight.
Interesting.
And I'm just sort of interested in the connective tissue effects when people do start to lose some weight. Like some people, like their connective tissue is very soft. Like lipedema, it tends to be more like honeycomb where the fat gets caught, and it can be incredibly fibrous, can be incredibly painful, worse in
Mm,
perimenopause, menopause.
mm,
But like the lymphedema, then, and I'm not talking about like say a cancer related lymphedema where they've had lymph nodes removed, but they can then be really soft and spongy. And just if they do then start to lose weight, like what sort of things do you think that you can do? Do you think you can get the connective tissue back if they do happen to lose that weight?
yeah, interesting. It's a very interesting question. I think that, I mean, I've got a couple of patients with really bad lymphedema, not lipedema. And sorry, and to clarify, the difference being essentially the lipedema is this like dystrophic fat, which is visibly very, very unsightly. And obviously lymphedema is swelling of the limb that's associated with poor like lymph drainage to that limb. I think I think that losing the weight, or obviously getting the weight down is like most important. Should be um should be obviously the goal. And then what happens after that, or to try and help. I mean, things like compression stockings can sometimes help. We use that in people that have severe leg swelling
Lymphedema.
after
Yeah.
yeah, lymphedema after deep vein thrombosis. So potentially compression to build it back up naturally. I mean, I vaguely remember seeing some evidence about photobiomodulation. I think maybe we looked at that previously. So potential that could help. I suspect as well, more from the lipedema point of view, just getting natural sunlight on the area. I think lipedema might probably is a combination of a seed oil rich diet and never showing that area to the sun in 3-4 decades, because the fat cells, they're so close to the surface, and they have melanopsin, they have these photosensitive proteins in them, and that regulate the beta oxidation. So you can increase the metabolism of the lipids in the fat cell, i.e. breaking them down quicker if you have that area exposed to the sun. And it makes sense because all these mechanisms help the body to or tell the body that if we're plugged into this massive energy source in the sun, and we're regulating our energy flows really efficiently through an appropriate light dark cycle, then why do we need to hold on to all this weight? Like, and that's we don't, and that's why the body has all these independent mechanisms to help lose weight when we have or reduce appetite under strong sunlight. So that's my kind of prescription, I think, for lipedema, which is just you often have to go do a very, very obviously zero processed food diet, sun exposure, and be eating more ancestrally appropriate fats. But as for the rehabilitation, I think elevation, sunlight exposure, some grounding. Would collagen rich bone broths help? Maybe, I don't know. Potentially worth a try.
Yeah.
Mm.
Sarah Kleiner's just put out a course for it. Yeah, and it's
Lipedema course.
yeah, sort of, yeah, where she sort of goes into it a little bit more and a few other ways. And it's sort of like just, you can keep doing courses forever.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, but to me, it makes sense that, potentially this is, well, it points to some extra factors at play other than just diet, because we've been, everyone's been on the seagull diet since the 80s, but, why would these lipidemic cases be spiking particularly now? And yeah, who knows, but it's probably something to do with the light environment, just like we were talking about the gestational diabetics. So, or the grounding, no one's grounded anymore. I mean, lots of possibilities.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting because like one of the things Sarah made a comment about was, grounding and getting the electron flow up through the fascial chain. And because the tissue gets very honeycombed, that you get this congestion. So trying to just massage the lymph and soften it up, if you don't have the electrons in the system, they won't move. But so it sort of makes sense to then light them up and potentially use red light on them as well. It's just complex. Do you know what I mean? Like it's multifactorial.
Yes, but that reminded me of Gerald Pollack's work and how he found that when you're grounded, the exclusion zone got bigger and the flow in the hydrophilic tube increased. So essentially, when you put these external energy sources in, whether it's electrons from grounding or infrared light from the sun, the flow in the vessel happens, irrespective of a pumping action. So
Yeah.
that was the justification for infrared light and grounding to help cardiovascular diseases, because you can get a whole bunch of venous return for free.
Yeah, right. So would then cold, like thermogenesis, would have to help too, because it would make the space of the electron transport chain work more efficiently. Would that be right?
Potentially, yeah, but it would also vasoconstrict the vessels to some degree. So it would help with essential lymph, probably venous return, and lymph drainage. So I think what Sarah's saying is it actually, following on the point that I talked about grounding, is that if these women are never grounding and never going outside, then they're potentially again working against, or they don't have these natural forces on their side to help venous return, to help lymph flow, and they're sedentary at the same time. So it sounds like a perfect storm for developing poor venous return or varicose veins, and potentially lymphedema as well.
Yeah. Okay, but thank you.
Cool. All right. Well, I have to head off, but thanks guys for tuning in live, and we will talk again next week. If anyone is interested, we've got some spots left for November's circadian living retreat, so you can hop on board for that and check out my podcast with Brian Grimm, which has just been released. So thanks very much.
Thanks, Max.
Thanks, Max.
Yeah.
No, no.
See you next time. Bye.